The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. This is Jessica Crejo with the Iowa Coalition for Integration and Employment and a member of your Employment First leadership team. Welcome to the March Community of Practice on Person-Centered Planning for Employment. Before we get started, we'll take care of a couple housekeeping things. First, I'd like to start off by thanking the DD Council for their investment and support of the Community of Practice this year. Historically, that's been supported and invested in by ODEP, so we're really appreciative and excited to have the DD Council doing so this year. Thanks to the Iowa Association of Community Providers for the use of their platform and for hosting all of us today. Thank you, thank you. And thanks also to the Center for Inclusive Design and Innovation out of the Georgia Institute for Technology. They're doing our live captions today. So a shout out to Heather, our live captioner. Thank you. If you need captions to participate in today's webinar, you can find that link to the live captions either, it's in two places today. It's either in the chat or in the questions pod or area of your control panel, which is usually along the right-hand side of your screen. We will record today's webinar, and we will be sure to disseminate that recording along with all the materials, including the presentations and additional resources and tools. You can receive a certificate of attendance or participation for attending today. Please just email me, Jess Crejo, directly, and I will get those for you. I will place my email directly in the chat pod for you so you can find, find it there. So you can email directly for those. And a short evaluation or survey will launch after the webinar. We ask that you please participate in that and give us your feedback. We really appreciate it. And it definitely shapes what we do going forward. So I think without further ado, I am going to first introduce you to Leanne Moskowitz and Amy Dessenberg-Wines, who really need no introduction, honestly. But Leanne Moskowitz is our LTSS policy specialist or subject matter expert over at IME. Amy heads up the Iowa Coalition for Integration and Employment, and they're going to talk to us today about person-centered planning. As we all know, that's the cornerstone of these individualized and quality supports that we provide, particularly as we try to get those integrated outcomes both in the community and related to employment. So as I had mentioned last time, we always kind of have this as a piece of our community of practice every year. And so you might say, why am I back for this? But again, it's really important. We all know that it's the cornerstone of what we do. So Leanne's going to give us a nice review and update on person-centered planning as it relates to HCBS funded services here in Iowa. And then Amy's going to finish us out with some nice resources and tools. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Leanne to get us started.
All right. Thanks, everybody, and welcome to the Community of Practice. I'll try and scroll through here. It doesn't like me. Oh, here we go. Am I on the? There we go. All right. So today I'm using foreign equipment. So today we're going to talk about person-centered planning, what it is, who's responsible, why it's so important to HCBS services or to any services for that matter. Today we're going to specifically talk about employment, and we'll talk about person-centered planning and as it relates to the employment outcomes. So I'm looking at this document here, and it still says Enclave, which makes me think I might have sent you on one that wasn't completely updated. So I'm a little concerned now, but we'll find out as we go along. So we'll get that updated to small group employment. That they're one and the same federally by the federal definition. So the plan. So as you all are aware, those of you who have been providing home and community-based services, that members receiving HTBS must have a comprehensive person-centered service plan. Some of you may be familiar with the term treatment plan. So if you're working in an integrated health home, you likely call the person-centered service plan a treatment plan. The member's case manager, care coordinator, or care coordinator is responsible to facilitate the member's interdisciplinary team. And so the interdisciplinary team are people that are chosen by the member to assist and represent the member's interests and desires during that service plan, to support them, help advocate for them, as well as those professionals who will be rendering the services to the member. So ideally, in the situation of services, you're going to have the case manager, any guardian or legal representative that the member may have, of course, the member themselves. They may have a friend they want to invite to support them, that knows what's important to the member, as well as any service providers that will be rendering services. So if the member is going to be receiving employment supports, it's extremely important that that member's employment service provider be present at the IDT meeting to discuss the plan.
We might have a technical difficulty here.
Really?
It seems that the scrolling isn't working. We're still on the title.
Is that what the audience is seeing? Because I see the plan up there at the top.
Yeah. Hi, Leanne. This is Jess. Yeah, I'm still seeing your title slide. I do see a little movement of whatever you just title slide. No go?
Well, is that the audience's view right here?
It should be, but Jess is saying that what they're seeing is the title slide.
I wonder what's going on.
Somebody else says we can see the plan and I can see the plan. So
okay.
Maybe.
Okay.
Okay. So we're good now.
Oh,
Perfect.
thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for the feedback, folks.
Yeah, this is an interactive participatory webinar. The IDT, so the interdisciplinary team, in conjunction with the member and the case manager, reviews the need for services. So when we review the need for services, that's going to be based on the member's history, the member's comprehensive functional assessment, and any other anecdotal information that we may have about the member and what the member wants and desires out of their plan for the next year. So the case manager or the care coordinator works to develop that service plan along with the IDT team. Everybody agrees to the plan, signs the plan in agreement, indicating that yes, this is what we discussed, this is what we all agreed to, and then the case manager submits the request for service authorization and the service plan to the member's managed care company or to through the individualized service system in ISIS or ISIS for those fee-for-service members who are not enrolled with a managed care company and receiving HTBS services. So the integrated health home care coordinator or the community-based case manager are responsible for monitoring the service plan implementation, ensuring that the member is receiving the services that were identified and authorized in the service plan. They also ensure that the services are achieving the desired outcomes. So monitoring the services may include looking at provider service documentation. It may be asking for progress reports from the providers on how the member is working towards goal achievement. If you're in long-term job coaching, it may be checking in and seeing how many hours is the member working, how many hours of job coaching are they receiving each week. Is the member to the point where services could potentially be faded? Is the member becoming more independent? Have they developed some natural support? Those kinds of things. So that ongoing monitoring is necessary. You may also, as a team, decide you want to have a team meeting on a more frequent basis than annually. For some members with intense service needs, IDT teams have been known to meet quarterly or maybe once every 6 months to check back in, especially if it's anticipated the members' needs are going to change quite a bit in that period of time. So that's kind of the plan and why it's important. So HCBS services and support. So this is kind of the flow or the hierarchy of how HCBS services come to be. And so again, you have that HCBS comprehensive functional assessment. So it may be the supports intensity scale, it may be the inter-array home care, it may be the inter-array community mental health, it may be the targeted plan for targeted case management, depending on which waiver the member is participating in and the age of the member. But for employment services, those are limited to the BI waiver, the ID brain injury waiver, intellectual disability waiver, and the state plan HCBS habilitation program. So with those, you're going to be looking at the supports intensity scale, the inter-array home care, and the inter-array community mental health. So the IDT team needs to review that comprehensive functional assessment during that team meeting. It's important that the team be able to review that comprehensive assessment to help the member identify what those priority needs are going to be for the next year. What are areas where we're going to have formal goals, where we're going to monitor and track progress on, versus those daily supports that a member may be receiving through a specific service as a course of participating in that service. It's identified in the service plan, but it's not something that formalized goal or program is going to be implemented for. It's a support. So again, the service plan or treatment plan must be clearly identifying those services that are going to be we're going to have formal goals for, that we're going to collect data on, frequency of the data collection, who's responsible for monitoring, what are we actually going to measure, when do we know the member is going to move on to the next step, and then those supports that we're just going to provide because the member needs it. I need a reminder to take my noontime medication. I'm not going to have a formal goal for that specifically, but staff are going to support me by giving me that reminder at noon or whatever, as an example of a support. So person-centered planning in context of HCBS. So this is specific to the member. Again, the person has to be at the center of what's going on. The old line, nothing about me without me, that is what person-centered planning is about. So it takes into account what are the individual's preferences, what do they want to do, what are their goals, what are ways that we can introduce new innovations or technology to help the person reach their goals. We need to talk about the member's goals, and are they realistic for the member? Are they observable? Are they measurable? Can we get the member as close to their goal achievement as desired? You know, we may have a member who, say, has a visual disability, but they want to be an airline pilot. Well, we know that's probably not going to be possible, but what could they do? How could they pursue that dream of, you know, could they get a job with an airline? Could, you know, those kinds of things. So thinking about the members' desires and dreams, and how do we get them there or as close to there as possible through the supports and services that we're providing through HCBS to help them live independent. So are there any natural supports that the member can access in fulfilling their service plan? Do they have a neighbor that is an emergency contact or is willing to give them a ride to work in a pinch, or, you know, something like that? Those things need to be identified in that person-centered plan. This is all about the person, how this person navigates their day-to-day life with the supports and services that are being funded by Medicaid that are being funded by other sources, and that may come naturally to the person, those unpaid supports. And then flexibility in scheduling. It's important when we're talking about person-centered planning, in that this needs to be tailored to the member to meet the member's needs, and that services should be scheduled and authorized in such a way to meet the needs of the member. So if I want to get a job in the evening, my job coach needs to work nights and support me. So it's getting away from the idea of all services occur between 9 to 5, and people live 24/7, and services should be occurring 24/7 as identified for the person. So again, being flexible in that scheduling, being creative in scheduling as well, and how we get services to the person is important. That's why it takes a team to support these folks. Service plan documentation. It's important that the service plan reflect individual strengths and preferences. This is about them, what they want, what they need. It needs to reflect any clinical and support needs that the person has. Are there medical conditions that need monitoring, or that staff may need education on? If this is a person with seizure disorder, staff need to be trained on the seizure protocol. There should be documentation in the service plan, how staff will be trained on the service protocol, when, what are the emergency protocols related to their seizure disorder, any medication, considerations, those kinds of things that a service provider needs to know when supporting someone. The goals need to be observable and measurable for the desired, and articulate what is the desired outcome. What does this goal hope to achieve? Any interventions and supports that are needed to meet those goals with incremental action steps as appropriate. So if I want to work independently in the community in a daycare center, what are the incremental steps that are going to get me there? Maybe I could start volunteering at a daycare center. Well, step one would probably be go around and see if anybody's looking for volunteers. Maybe I could do some career exploration services through the pre-voc services to, figure those next steps out. So it's important that the team think about and really be deliberate when talking about the services that are going to be provided. What is the true purpose of those services? What is the goal that we're attempting to help the member achieve? And how will we know when we get there? And then identify the people and the businesses and the organizations that are going to be responsible for those interventions and supports. Again, that's why the providers all have to be at the table during that service plan development. If the service providers aren't there, it's really not a valid service plan because they didn't have input. So it's important that, and anyone who is involved has input. If it's a person under the age of 22 who's still attending school that has an individual education plan, that needs to be taken into consideration. If this is somebody who is working with Voc Rehab and it's a member that we share in common with Voc Rehab, the services and supports that the member's getting through Voc Rehab should be documented in that service plan. If that Voc Rehab counselor can be there at that team meeting, fantastic. They should at minimum be invited, and be invited enough in advance that they have the opportunity to participate if they can. And so that's important. Again, these meetings have to happen at a time and place that's convenient to the member. Invitations should be sent out to the team well in advance so that people who are able to participate can participate. And at very minimum, if they can't be there in person, they submit written feedback that can be incorporated into the service plan in advance of the team meeting.
Dan, can I ask a question? Sometimes we hear that meetings will occur with very short notice, or maybe not all team members are invited, or sometimes I've even heard that the individual themselves might not be included in a meeting. So if something were to come up, or if any of our participants have had that experience, what would they need to do? What would be a proper way to then get back on track with ensuring that everybody has enough advance notice and it's inclusive of all the key partners?
Well, I think it's important that if the member, number one, isn't included, that needs to be brought to the attention of the case management supervisor with the managed care organization, or with policy if it's a fee-for-service person. We need to know this stuff so that we can get ahead of it. I would argue that if a member was not able to participate in the service plan due to their disability, they could still passively participate and be present. And so even if they have representation, again, I would argue it's all about the member. If they're not there, it really can't be a valid service plan. So I think that needs to be brought to folks' attention, really. We want this. We truly have been embracing the person-centered planning process for years in this state, and we really want to continue to embrace that philosophy in service planning. So,
before you move on, Leanne, here's another question that kind of goes along with where we've gotten so far. But I know I hear from a lot of providers, this is Gayla, I hear from a lot of providers that when they're working with the MCOs, they're not as committed to the person-centered aspect of this. It really comes down to being much more medical model, kind of what we had back when I started, and well, we worked so hard to move away from. How would you offer to people to help navigate that and keep the
well, I strongly encourage providers to push back. I mean, providers are the subject matter experts when it comes to rendering home and community-based services to Iowans, and the majority of providers have been operating in the system for a long time and understand the philosophy and understand the approach from the state. And so I strongly recommend that those providers push back, advocate for the process, advocate for the member, and if that's not going anywhere, follow the grievance process with the managed care organizations. There's several avenues to grieve the processes within the plan. So I would just look at your provider manual and follow those processes. And you know, there are well-intentioned, good people working at these managed care organizations who do embrace the person-centered philosophy. And I think when these things aren't happening correctly, it's either due to misinformation or folks taking shortcuts. So I think the more we can talk about it, bring it to people's attention, it gives them the opportunity to deal with it. So I think that would probably be your first strike on issues as they crop up like that.
Thank you.
Yep. So service plan documentation for pre-vocational services. So when we talk about pre-vocational services, we need to identify the location where services are being delivered at the time the member's going to start receiving services, the number of hours a day that the member will participate in the service, the amount of supervision they need, what is the plan for the member to participate in career exploration, what is the status of providing the member with information regarding employment, supported employment, the benefits of work, and referral to supported employment services. So we should always talk about work first. Before we say, oh, well, they're getting ready to go to graduate high school, let's get them signed up for pre-voc services. Heck no, why not get them involved with individual supported employment? Why not make a referral to Iowa Vocational Rehab so they can get the discovery services going and they will eventually come back to us under long-term job coaching. Let's talk about employment first. We are an employment first state, and there's the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act that clearly states people should have the opportunity to work in their communities before going into a pre-vocational type of setting or a sheltered workshop type of setting. That's not to say that some people don't benefit. You know, there are people who definitely benefit from participation in pre-vocational services when it's done right, that's truly preparing them for employment in the community. And the career exploration activities can definitely benefit anybody who has a goal of wanting to go to work who isn't currently working. So I think all of those things need to be talked about during that service plan meeting. Oops. Am I on the right? There we go. Okay. So when we talk about pre-vocational services, it's important to remember that if we're authorizing pre-vocational services in a service plan, and we're recommending that this member participate in pre-vocational services, that member has to have an actual goal of integrated community employment. They have to want to get a job. You know, pre-vocational services for many, many years was used to provide the member with meaningful activity during the day so they weren't just sitting at home. And however, we did it under the guise of calling it folks' jobs. Well, that's not really a job, it's job preparation. And so we need to call it what it is and identify it clearly in the service plan what the plan is. If the member is going to participate in pre-vocational services, how long will they participate in pre-vocational services? How long will they participate in pre-vocational services before they start participating in career exploration? And at what point in time, if they're participating in career exploration, then our goal should be that they'll also be moving on to supported employment at some point in time. Maybe they remain with pre-voc as a wraparound for a while, but the goal should be moving on to integrated community employment for folks. And so again, if we don't have a goal of working, if this person never wants to go to the community and work in an integrated community job, they should not be authorized pre-voc services. There's other meaningful activities that people can do during the day. They can participate in day hab, they can participate in recreational opportunities with their daily SEL provider, if that's what they're receiving during the day, but pre-voc is for folks who want to go to work and need additional support to help them get there. So supported employment services is that folks will obtain sustained employment or supported self-employment at or above the minimum wage or customary wage for that job, with benefits paid by their employer in an integrated setting in the general workforce, and a job that is meaningful to the person, not just because it's a placeholder for the agency that supplies the employees to that job. We want to make sure that folks are engaged in meaningful work because that's work that lasts. An expected outcome of supported self-employment is that the member earns income that's equal to or exceeds the average income for a chosen business within a reasonable period of time. So that lends to reason that if it's identified in the member service plan that I'm going to be participating in supported self-employment, then the business should be identified and there should be specific steps and tasks identified that that individual supported employment service provider is going to assist the member with in getting that self-employment situation off the ground and going, and then what that long-term job coach is going to do to provide support to the member so they can continue to engage in their self-employment endeavor going forward. So, you know, that is something new that we've added during 2016 to our rules and clarification around supported self-employment. And for a lot of folks, especially folks with chronic illnesses or folks who tend to cycle with the symptoms of their mental health, self-employment can be a real nice way for them to be engaged in the workforce. Oops. I think I keep moving it up. There we go. So for supported employment service plan documentation, it needs to document the place of employment at the time of enrollment, or if the member hasn't obtained a job yet, where would they like to be employed? What are their desired employment goals? Because, of course, if I'm working with an individual employment specialist for individual supported employment, I might not have a job yet. He or she may be helping me locate a job and helping me to meet with employers to obtain a job. So what is the place of employment, or where do they hope to obtain employment? What are the number of hours per day that they need supervision and support? How many other workers will be in the location? If they're working in a small group setting, how many people are in that setting? And am I working in a group of 2? Am I working in a group of 4? Am I working in a group of 8? Again, why? Because when we reimburse the service through Medicaid, it's based on the number of people that are working in that small group environment. We also want to know, we want to make sure the setting is integrated. When we pay for supported employment, that needs to be occurring in an integrated community setting. If the only other employees in that setting are other employees that are also being publicly supported to be employed, that is not an integrated setting. And so that's why we ask, that's why it needs to be documented in that service plan. Again, employment services are impacted by the HCBS setting rules. The non-residential settings where member receives services, aka employment sites, have to be integrated into the community. And then the status of referral to IVRS should also be on there. So our service documentation should always reflect the services, the providers of the services and supports, including any unpaid or voluntary supports that the member may receive, that neighbor who will give me a ride in a pinch, that aunt who I can call if I need to go home from work sick, that kind of thing. Who's the provider, what services are authorized, the units of service authorized, and the period of service authorized. And then any risk factors and measures in place to minimize the risk. So again, it's so important that the IDT team talk about risk factors as it pertains to the member, their safety, the community safety, etc. Are there any risks that we need to mitigate? If that person has, as example I used earlier, seizure disorder, how can we mitigate some of the risks along with the member having an unpredictable seizure? What can we do? How can we take some, preventative measures or preemptive measures to minimize any potential injury, that type of thing? So are there other risk factors in place that we need to address? Is the member vulnerable to victimization? What can we do to, what things can we put into place to minimize that? What tools can we help the member put in their toolbox so that they can minimize that in the workplace as well as at home, etc. So when we talk about the risk factors, again, if I have a risk in one environment, chances are that risk carries over to other environments. So that if we've identified things for me in the home, if we've identified things for me out in the community, chances are they may apply to my workplace also. And so we need to talk about those things. So we want to make sure, again, that the individuals that are important to the member participate in that service plan. Everyone that's responsible for monitoring the plan needs to be documented in the plan. First and foremost, it's going to be that case manager or care coordinator, and then those providers that are going to be paid for rendering those services. They are responsible for monitoring the services that their members are receiving, that their staff are rendering to the members, and following the service plan that has been written. The service plan also needs to be written in plain language that's easily understood by the member. The member may need some accommodation to understand their service plan, and that's expected to be given, whether it be interpretation services, whether it be the member maybe needs some type of picks or whatever to help them understand their the plan. The team needs to tailor that communication and that plan to meet the member's communication needs. Again, document who's responsible for monitoring that plan. Nothing is more challenging for a team than to have a member on a goal, be paying for services, get 6 months down the road and find out that nobody's been implementing that goal because it wasn't written somewhere and it wasn't formalized in the service plan, or it wasn't clear, or staff weren't trained, or what have you. That's why that monitoring is so important.
Hey, Leanne, this is Jess. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hey, I've got a question that came in. So someone working with an IHH care coordinator who was using the UHC plan format for the first time. The plan correctly stated the tier level of support that they had agreed upon in the meeting, but several questions on the plan form were left unanswered, including the number of hours per day that on-site staff supervision would be needed. Is there a possibility that that plan will be rejected and funding could be interrupted until corrections are made?
I'm not sure I can answer that question, because if the managed care plan, it would be up to UHC whether or not they accept that service plan from the case manager. I would argue that if anything is blank on the service plan, it needs to go back to the case manager to be fulfilled. However, it's up to UHC whether or not they find that acceptable or not.
Okay, thank you.
If it came in for fee-for-service with blanks, we would send it back.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Perfect.
Yep. All right. So, again, we want all the signatures of the individuals and providers responsible for that plan documented on the service plan. We want the service plan to be distributed to all the members that were participating, the individual and the other folks involved in the plan. If there's consumer choices option, again, that needs to be documented. If the member's getting any of their employment supports through the consumer choices option, that should be clearly identified in the plan. And then, of course, the plan should exclude anything that's unnecessary or inappropriate. We would hope that's the case. All right, so important items to discuss and document in your service plan. Transportation. Wow, there's a lot of conversations going on lately about transportation. I shouldn't say lately, for a while now, about transportation. So it's important that this is focused on and discussed during the team meeting, and that it is clearly documented who is responsible for transportation. If a member is receiving ID waiver, daily SCL, that daily SCL provider daily rate includes reimbursement for transportation that has been identified in the member's service plan. So if that daily SCL provider is going to be the one to take that member to and from their job, or to and from a centralized site to where then they'll go to a job, or to the pre-vocation, then that needs to be documented in the service plan clearly for everybody to see and understand. If the member is going to use standalone transportation under the BI waiver to get to and from their job, that needs to be documented. If a daily SCL direct care staff is going to take somebody, that needs to be documented. If the job coach is going to bill for transportation time and come pick the member up and then go to the job site and take the member back home, that needs to be documented. It's so important because the units of service to provide that transportation also needs to be documented and authorized for that member. It doesn't do any good to say the supported employment provider is going to provide that transportation to and from the supported employment services or to the member's job, etc., and then not provide the units of service to allow that to happen. And so, again, it has to be clearly identified in that service plan. This is an identified need from the assessment. The service provider is going to render that transportation, and we need to make sure we're authorizing the units to make that happen. Communication, it's so important to talk about communication. You know, different people have different preferences these days. Some people want to talk to a person on the phone. Some people like a text message. Some people don't mind an email. You know, so document what is the member's preferred method of communication. Are they able to communicate by any of these methods? Do they use augmentative communication? Do they have to use the TTY system? You know, talk about those things. And then how is the employment specialist, job coach, service provider going to be communicating with the member and then the member's employer or potential employers? And that should be documented also. Again, this plan is our roadmap on how we're going to support this person for the next 12 months. It should be as detailed as possible. If we leave out a bridge or we leave out a road, we might get lost. I don't think your thing likes me. Anyway, so service plan documentation. Again, I think this is a duplicate. There we go. Wages, financial literacy. Excuse me, it's important to talk about wages. Can the member independently manage their earned income? Do they need assistance? Do they have somebody to give them that assistance? Do they have a payee? Has the member received benefits planning? Do they know how wages earned are going to impact their income? Has anybody looked at a savings account for the person or an ABLE account for the person? Is the member participating in Ticket to Work? Are there are there things that the person could use for employment that they could obtain through Ticket to Work dollars? So again, talk about wages, talk about, you know, does the member know how to manage their money? And do they have financial goals? Do they have something they're saving for? It's, you know, important. We all work because we need a paycheck. And we all specifically know on any given moment where that paycheck goes. And so I think it's only right that we have that same conversation and help members become educated about their own financial literacy as well. So, links, online resources. So again, these are kind of the old faves. Our admin rules, our HCBS webpage, our Employment First Guidebook, 2nd edition. We will start working on a 3rd edition. We've got some changes we need to add in there, some more clarifications. FAQ, we probably are about due to probably put out an updated FAQ. I'm sure there's some questions we can add to that since last time. The employment webpage for MHDS, and of course, oops, I do not know what just happened. I apologize. Where did the document go?
Oh, let's open up the guidebook.
Oh, I think I clicked on the link. Okay, so how do I get out of that and get back to the? Your screen's really hard to read. Oh, thank you. Gotta learn how to drive this thing. Anyway, so there last few pages are some helpful links. On the very last page, I gave you IVRS's links to their benefits planning information, and so I think it'll be helpful for you all to look at those links. Go out and visit the VR webpage if you know folks who could benefit from the benefits planning service. So with that, I think I'm done. That's it.
Wonderful.
For me. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Turn it over to Amy.
Hi, everybody. This is Amy Duffenberg-Wines, and I'm going to see if I can figure out how to. I don't have any idea what I just did, Kayla.
That's the problem with using somebody else's.
I know. Sorry.
There you
Down
go.
there at the bottom where you have the PowerPoint. There would be. All right. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit. I think Leanne made a fabulous case for how person-centered planning is really embedded in everything we do when we work with members and when we develop plans and when we implement plans and we reassess and evaluate and monitor plans. And so what I was hoping was that I could maybe bring some resources to your attention today of things that might help you with that person-centered planning process. Excuse me, I thought I would just touch on a bit why is this discussion important for employment beyond some of the requirements for person-centered planning with our funding streams. When we talk about employment, we all work for different reasons. And I come from a large family, and I think about the fact that in my family, among my siblings, we had all very different driving factors for why we worked and what we were looking for in work. And some of us, excuse me, really wanted to pursue employment that aligned strongly with interests or passions or skill sets. Others in my family were really driven by wanting to work to really help cover their expenses and their hobbies, and they wanted to like their jobs and they wanted to be competent, but that wasn't the highest priority for them in their work, because more the things outside their work were their greater priorities, and they used their work as a mechanism to be able to have the opportunity to do their outside interests. So I share that because when we talk about person-centered planning, when we're supporting individuals with employment planning, employment preparation, employment placement, we really need to know as much as possible about those individuals. And I would challenge that we want to look beyond maybe just the lens that we typically use when we're asking people what they want to do for their career and we're assessing what might be a good match. Really, we want to go a little deeper, especially for individuals who might have complex situations. An illustration I would use would be for those of you who are familiar with discovery and customized employment, the customized employment model. That's a really good illustration of really delving deeper in learning about an individual, what they bring, what they might potentially bring to a work environment, where their strengths are, what are their conditions for employment. It's a lot more information to work from in planning and in matching, and the hope is that by doing that, that you will make a better match for the individual and their employment. And hopefully from that, you will see better retention, better satisfaction. There's just a higher level of success when you have more information you're utilizing to work from in your planning that's specific to that individual and their wants and needs. So I want to challenge you, if you haven't already thought about person-centered planning in a broader way. Person-centered planning, there's a relatively new organization that's been established called the National Center on Advancing Person-Centered Practices and Systems. And one of the things that they reference is they talk a little bit about how person-centered planning is really a lot bigger than just asking people some questions about what they want. They refer to sort of three areas: person-centered thinking, which is essentially a foundational principle requiring consistency in language and values and actions that reveals respect, views the person and their loved ones as experts in their own lives,
and equally emphasizes quality of life, well-being, and informed choice. So that's a whole way of thinking in everything we do when we interact and serve an individual. Then you have person-centered planning, which is really a methodology that identifies and addresses the preferences and interests that make up a desired life and the supports, paid and unpaid, needed to achieve it. It's directed by the person and is supported by others selected by the person. It might utilize a whole series of tools and process. There's not one size fits all. Then you have person-centered practices, and there is alignment of services and systems to ensure the person has access to the full benefits of community living and to deliver services in a way that facilitates the achievement of the person's desired outcomes. What I'd like to challenge our participants today to think about is how good are we doing at looking at this whole picture of thinking, planning, and practices. How are those embedded in our organizations and our agencies? How do we go beyond just asking questions on a form about what someone does, so we can really have that be a key pillar of our services and our service delivery process. An example I want to share with you, and you are able to download this document in your handout section, but there's a California collaborative that formed, and they came out with a report, and the link is here, and it's called Building Capacity for Person-Centered Thinking in Support of People with Developmental Disabilities. And I would really encourage folks who are interested in this to take a look at it, because it has a number of very worthwhile pieces of information in it. And one of the things that it does is it really kind of talks about an overview of person-centered thinking and some practices and tools, but it also highlights six different organizations who really tried to embed it in their programs and philosophy and what happened as a result of that. It references common kind of across the board from those agencies, the lessons learned from that, the investment that it costs the providers and agencies, as well as the outcomes that they saw as a result of that. So there's really great information about kind of taking this concept of thinking, planning, and practices and giving some really specific illustrations and tools for that in that document. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that if you're interested. The next resource that I wanted to highlight, and this isn't something to download, but you have the link here. It's another organization out of California, and they have a really, at this site that you land on when you hit this link, if you scroll down their page, you'll see this really nice, pretty comprehensive table of actual tools that can be used in the person-centered planning process, or resources that can be utilized. And then what I really thought was useful is it talks about what that tool does and possible uses for the information you gather from that tool. And so an example would be to look at the, I just took the first couple in the table to show you kind of what you might see when you go look at that resource. But that first example under skill, where it talks about the sorting important to versus important for information. And essentially, important to is what's important to the individual. What's important for might be what others think is important for the individual versus, you know, maybe it's related to health and safety, maybe it's related to just our perceptions of what we think that person should be doing or should want to do. And it may or may not align with what's important to the individual. The reason this might be a really helpful exercise to go through with someone is when you are not, when we look at satisfaction, if I'm forced to do something, even if I'm compliant, if it's not important to me, I'm not going to have a lot of satisfaction with that. What if I'm not compliant, which is most of the time? Then if you're asking me to do something that's important to you, but not important to me, I may not do it. I may sabotage it. I may just not invest in it. And chances are good I'm not going to be successful, or definitely not successful long term, because it's not what's important to me. An illustration that I listened to that was an example with an individual. There was an individual who was gaining a lot of weight, and this person was really becoming obese, and it was creating some real health issues for the person. Person had been put on multiple diets, and for some reason that just wasn't working out. They weren't losing any weight. In fact, sometimes they were still gaining weight, and they'd tried the diet process for so long, and it still wasn't working. And so some of the folks that were supporting the individual said, you know, okay, we've tried cutting back on eating and dieting, and that's not working. This person's health is at risk. We need to figure out what are other ways people can lose weight. Well, if you're not adjusting your intake, then you need to adjust your movement, your exercise level, right? So they decided what would be good is for that individual to do more exercise. So they bought a stationary bicycle, and they set it up in the lower level of the person's residence, and they said, okay, you've got to pedal for so much time, so many days a week. And the person was like, boring, not doing it. So then they said, okay, we're going to put the TV down here, and if you want to watch your favorite shows, you're going to have to pedal to watch your favorite shows. And the person said, I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's right. And they had a very valid concern, right? So then one of the staff said, hey, I belong to a women's gym. Why don't I see if this individual wants to go with me, it was a female, to this women's gym, and let's see if that works. So they took the individual to the women's gym, and the individual wasn't very impressed with it. So then there was a male staff who said, you know, I belong to a fitness center that's a co-ed center. Maybe that person would like to try that. I'll take that person to the co-ed center. So they took the person with them to the co-ed center. And when they walked in, the female immediately noticed what she referred to as the hunks who were lifting weights. And she liked standing there and watching men lift weights. And so the staff person said to her, you know, there's kind of this rule at the gym that if you're here and you want to watch other people, you have to be exercising too. And so they found a treadmill that had a mirror that faced the weightlifting area, and the individual was more than happy to walk on that treadmill. And 70 pounds later, they were still going to the gym regularly because they found something that was important to that individual that aligned with what they believed was something important for that individual. But clearly, until they hit that, it wasn't working. So when you think back to what Leanne talked about around person-centered planning and the plan development and the information used to shape that plan, and then kind of all the people responsible and the monitoring, this is just an example of one tool out of many tools that could be utilized in supporting a process that tries to get at a little deeper information that will hopefully help shape that plan to be a little more person-centered. Now let's talk about South Dakota. South Dakota's Department of Human Services and Division of Developmental Disabilities came out with a really nice person-centered employment planning guide. You have the link on the slide, as well as a copy you can download in the handout section of the slide. This is a really nice tool that folks could use just to give some illustrations of, it's not a very long tool, but it gives illustrations of when people are in different situations, what are some sample questions that could be asked, what are some person-centered thinking tools that might be able to be used to help gather information in the areas that were identified. And then depending on the participants' response, what are some things that could be integrated into the service plan around that response, or things to think about to be integrated into the service plan. One of the things that I thought was most useful about this resource was the idea that it really sort of took different questions that you might want to explore with an individual, and it gave a list of tools that you could utilize if you wanted or needed to help get a little deeper in that information than just a typical conversation with an individual. A few more resources that I wanted to share with folks. There is the Learning Community for Person-Centered Practices. It's available to everyone. It's free. There's tons of resources. It's really essentially a learning community. So there's a number of different things you can access as well as share with others. So I encourage you to check it out. A lot of the person-centered practice resources I came across reference the learning community as a great place to go for information. There's also the Helen Sanderson Associates resource, which is also a wealth of information, and it has a lot of examples. It has tools and videos. It talks about how they can be utilized. You can download the tools. It tells you what they can help with and where you can go to learn more information. I think there's courses there as well. I think they have a wide lens of looking at working with youth as well as adults in a number of different settings. So there's some great resources there. Then the third that's listed is an article called More Than Just a Job, Person-Centered Planning, Institute for Community Inclusion. It's a brief, and it's really just a nice thing. It's a little bit older, but it still has some great information about person-centered planning process, and specifically as it relates to employment and some of the thinking around that, some approaches and considerations, and the benefit and value of that. And then the last resource that's listed here, we will send out, because I maximize the number of resources that could be on the platform for downloading. So we'll send that out with the PowerPoints and other resources to the participants today. But that's called Starting With Me, a Guide to Person-Centered Planning for Job Seekers. That's a tool that's intended to be used, that an individual could utilize, or someone who's supporting the individual could utilize, in really having individuals sort of work through a process themselves around person-centered planning. So it's a really nice tool that I think could also be, again, used for both youth and adults. So I wanted to just say, you know, there are lots and lots of resources out there. If you just do a search on the internet and put in person-centered thinking, person-centered planning, how to do it, tools, resources, you can go in so many different directions, and there's so many free resources out there, as well as more comprehensive training that you can get with online courses, with bringing people in for training within your organization. But, you know, I just would encourage you, I think that although we're really, really good at talking about person-centered planning and the importance, I don't know that we're all that far at embedding it into our organizations and our systems. And I think that people would see a higher degree of positive outcomes and success and satisfaction. One of the things that the first resource I pointed out across those 6 organizations in California who really approached trying to embed this more in their organizations, they found a real increase in not only consumer satisfaction, with services, but staff satisfaction with services, and lower turnover rates with staff, and higher retention. And so I think that it's beneficial not only for those that we provide services to support, but also within our own organization, there's some tools that could be utilized, I think, to help us. So anyway, there's a lot more resources out there. I just wanted to share kind of a broad sample of resources with you. And now it's really up to you on what you want to do with that information. I think we'll just open it up and see. It's 2:05. All right. Leanne said we maximize our time. Any questions?
I'm willing to take questions if people are hanging on.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, if you guys send in any questions or comments that you have as we finish up here. Oh, I might have one for you. So the question is, I'm curious if Iowa is currently tracking and reporting out data on how many people are using Prevoke or supported employment versus adult daycare services funded by the waiver programs, and or if individuals are waiting for services. So are we collecting data around Prevoke, supported employment versus day services across the waivers?
We know how many people are participating in employment services, including pre-vocational services. I don't believe we're tracking on the number of people that are in adult daycare or dayhab at this time, but we do collect employment outcomes data. The last time we reported that publicly and aggregately was for the the April 2018 data. We just received the October 2018 data at the end of last month, and so that data is going to be aggregated, and then it will be shared with employment providers. It'll be shared at the next coalition meeting as well. So we do collect that information. So we know how many people are in Prevoke, know how many people are competitively employed, know how many people are long-term job coaching, small group, etc.
Okay, perfect.
Was that the full question?
That was the full question. The last part was, do we know if individuals are waiting for services? And I'm taking that to mean not on a waiver waiting list, but are probably already waiver funded and waiting to get into employment services.
We do not track on providers that have wait lists for services. I'm not aware of the managed care organizations doing that. However, that may be part of their network management. I'm just not aware of anybody tracking on providers keeping wait lists. I hear about it anecdotally, but no one's actually tracking on who has wait lists and who doesn't.
Right, yep. Thank you very much. I'll wait to see if anything else comes in. In the meantime, I'll just remind you to please let me know if you need a certificate of attendance. I put my email in the chat pod. We did record, and we will disseminate that recording, and all the presentations and tools that you saw today, we'll be sure to send that out. Don't forget that the short survey or evaluation questions will launch after the webinar. Please answer those. We really appreciate that, and we will be back Tuesday, April 16th at 1 p.m., where we'll do school to work and partnering with schools. Really excited about this presentation. Amy and Kirsten will be there to kind of walk us through that. Specifically, Kirsten Lane will be there to talk us through a lot of those pieces. But we'll also be sure to introduce to you and share with you a collaboration toolkit that IC developed on behalf of the association. That's really a toolkit or a guide around providing those pre-ET services and kind of how to collaborate across the partners of providers, IVRS, educators, and families on that. So we hope to see you back April 16th. And I think without further ado, we'll let you all go. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you in April. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.
Amy. Thanks, Leanne. Appreciating it.
Absolutely.
Have a great day.
Have a great day, everybody.